Hello, and welcome back to this is our first of our series of minisodes. What the hell is a minisode, really?
I don't know. It sounds like a ridiculous fucking term to me. Minisode.
Yeah.
Sounds
How about
garbage.
maxisode?
Maxisode.
Maximum content, minimum amounts of soda.
Yeah. It's essentially at least another rant by Mikael Christiansen and Emmet Lewis about handstands. Here we are.
Yeah.
Let's go.
This minisode, we're going to be dealing with some of your questions. So we have a very advanced system of sending questions over yourselves, where they're arriving by carrier pigeon, and definitely not SMS. Definitely not SMS.
No, but best way if you want us, like for later episodes like this, if you want to have your questions discussed between me and Emmet, then either message us things on social media that you want us to speak about, or just wrap a piece of paper around a brick and throw it on one of our respective windows. So yeah,
Very tempting.
let us know.
It's also, you can use the contact form on the Handstand Factory website and just use the title podcast questions. So it's one of these things. Questions are always an interesting thing. I kind of made a bit of a joke towards the end of the last episodes that if your question is good, we will read it out. If your question is bad, we'll read it out with your name attached. We're not going to be that mean if your question's bad. We're just going to tear it to pieces and crush your soul.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So
So let's see. Shall we get to our first question that I'm totally just pulling out of here? This one's definitely... Yeah, I'm going to start with this one just to show the level of questions we get.
it's kind of
So-
degenerate.
Yeah, it's a degenerate question. So this degenerate wants to know, Mikael, can you pee in a handstand without getting it in your mouth? If so, what shape is best?
Well, so I've never tried to pee in handstand. I've drunk beer in handstand. That's no problem. You just do head through and someone pour into your mouth. It's kind of miserable, but it works. Peeing, however, I think you would end up in a rather sad and wet state unless you do it in the Mexican. I guess a Mexican would be the
Depends on how you
preferred.
arch it. Like if you do a Mexican and it arcs the right direction, but it could just dribble down your chest and like roll
Yeah,
straight into your
I need
face.
you to have to whip it like the other way. At least as a guy, I'm not sure how this would work out as a girl. But a proper enough Mexican, you should be able to get it to go the other way. I think if you
Yeah,
if you have a
Mexi-
deep enough Mexican.
If your Mexican is south, definitely south of the border.
Yeah, mine isn't even like as
Are
we
you in
talked about-
Texas or are
Yeah.
you in Mexico?
I mean, mine is still in Toronto, so I'm not going to try to. I mean, I don't do
I say
Mexicans.
planche would be superior for peeing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Planche is probably the best one. Now, being strong enough to actually finish peeing, you need a pretty damn good planche.
Yeah, I think it's like, what's that thing they say? It takes 21 seconds to empty your bladder for most kind of mammals.
Yeah,
when it's full.
then you have a serious above average solid planche if you can
Yeah,
pee in it for 21 seconds.
21 seconds. But
I'll
maybe-
leave that challenge to any one of you out there because I'm not going to planche for that long, nor trying to pee in one. But hey.
I suppose you could at one arm though. You could just like
Oh yeah, you
aim
can
it
hold
away.
it, right? Yeah, that would work. That would probably work. It would still probably end up miserable, and
But like,
yeah,
could
I'm
you?
not gonna do it.
The hard bit, I suppose, is like if you're trying to tap the drips off. But
Yeah,
you're
you're
in a
gonna
handstand,
piss
you're
yourself
gonna,
in the face. I mean, you're gonna piss on your chest and piss everywhere. So like, hey, yeah,
It's one of these ones like, how does it work for women as well? Like, you know, men have we have the kind of hose attachment that kind of gives a bit of aim. But for girls, how would that happen?
Yeah.
You can see Eliza, our producer, is down,
Yeah,
turning slightly red.
you like at least as a woman, I would assume you'd have to push a lot harder to make the stream go further away from you. But I don't know. I think it's
Maybe that's
not.
why.
I mean, I don't think it's a great idea. Regardless, I think we're
Yeah.
moving on basically. So
Maybe that's why everyone talks about like use your core in a handstand.
yeah,
It's just in case this situation pops up.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, suffer.
Next question. You get to ask one now.
So, how are the workouts divided up in the press program, please?
So yeah, the press program. I think it's interesting. The press program we cover three main components in it, I suppose, where we have split the Stalder press up into two sections, which we talk about. We're going to talk about in one of our other podcasts in a bit more depth. where we have high pressing, which is pressing from feet and hands on basically the same plane up to a straddle handstand, and low pressing, which is pressing from a straddle L-sit or an L-sit to the point where your feet cross your hands. And then we also have flexibility. So in this, our own belief on this is that you can basically start working on things that will lead to the Stalder at the same time, regardless of your level, even if you come as a complete beginner. We've put it in that you have a selection of workouts that you'll be able to find an appropriate level for you on flexibility, press, high press and low press. And then you have a few options. You can combine them together into one big workout. Find it takes about an hour to do that workout with all three components. Or you can spread them throughout the week where it's like, okay, I'll work on high press Tuesday and Thursday, and I'll work low press Wednesday and Saturday, and I'll do my flexibility after leg day. You're doing leg day, right?
I don't. But like to add on to that, like, so the rationale is basically that like the lower part of the press, the low press, moving then from the straddle L or an L-sit position up to the standing position, and then the standing press from a standing into the handstand are two different components in terms of strength and muscle activation, control, etc. So it makes sense to train those two pieces separately, simply because what you want when you are training, you want to just be able to put the appropriate working volume and intensity onto your body, and when you've done so, then you rest, and then you do that again, and hopefully you will have done the appropriate amount and the appropriate level of intensity, so that you'll be gaining strength slowly and consistently and building up your press through that. Now, if you're constantly trying to then work a full press, meaning that you work both the low and the high range at once, which is appropriate when you're strong enough and when you actually have it, but you won't be able to kind of target the ranges as much. So being able to then separate those two things, because one is essentially protraction and depression strength, which is the low pressing, where you will need a tuck planche, you will need kind of that type of power, loads like kind of in front of your shoulder, lats, delts, etc. And then you have the high pressing, which ideally won't be using as much of the delts and kind of biceps frontal pushing chain, and be more kind of upper back related and traps. So yeah, being able to separate these two things is essentially kind of structurally what we're working on, and of course adding the flexibility into this so that you'll be using less strength over time as you get better.
So it gives you a good overview. If you're interested, we do have the program online on Handstand Factory where you can basically go from zero to hero, which leads into I suppose we have it described in the manual actually is the sandwich. You got to make your sandwich with the components you want. So this is how it's kind of arranged. It's like, I got my three components. So I've got the bread and I got the filling. And then, the filling is the one you would make as the main workout you need to focus on. Like if the low press section takes the most energy, you do that first. Then you do your high pressing, or vice versa. Or if you're super stiff and really need to warm, you might work the flexibility first as the meat, and then put the bread on with the pressing sections. So there's a lot of it's very customizable, which is what I like about it, because at the end of the day, despite what some people say, there is no one true way of doing this. You just have to find what works for you.
Everyone who starts this kind of stuff will come with you will come with a different level of various things. You might be a monster at pushing from an L-sit and up and don't have a real, or like a standing press to handstand, or you might be the opposite. You might be really stiff and strong, you might be very flexible and have no strength, etc. So this is kind of the rationale and the thought process behind having this. And you might also have a great handstand and very little pressing strength, or have no handstand and loads of pressing strength. All these variables exist out there. So this kind of structuring is an attempt at being able to tailor to that, because like no one can know everyone's variations, because there's just way too many. And this is to not tangent and rant too much on it, but basically and I think most coaches that start out teaching handstands early, you won't be just able to account for all of these ridiculous amount of variation there is. Like, it took me like 5 years of teaching until I saw, hey, like I need to stop using these cues, because like there's just way too many variations, and you'll just meet these people who are just like, I can't really like for example, cubital varus, which is a elbow structure variation. It's not there's no genetic, can't be classified as a disorder at all, but it's just a variation. And like,
so
if
bone
you have
structure.
it's a bone structure. If you have that, you might need to go about things slightly differently. And this is what it is. It's not something that you can have kind of a one size fits all kind of approach to.
Yeah, it's ranges. Do you want to ask the next question?
Yes, let's see. Is the Push Harder program a must before working on the press program? No.
No. I'd say the press
of the
program
opposite.
is kind of a must for working on Push Harder.
Yeah, more
Would
like to a degree at least. At
Yeah,
least the high pressing should be reasonably well developed before it's much of a point of starting to do.
Like the start, like a lot of the prep elements, I suppose you could work from Push Harder, like the head in, the chin in stuff. They'll cross over to the press, and the press will cross over to them. But no, it's not a. The programs can be taken singly or mixed.
Yeah, so like as for the so like the program structure, just to quickly make a recap of them. So you have Push, which is basic handstand program leading you from either then not having a handstand into having a handstand and then refining it, or having a handstand and then refining that handstand. Templates based on like where you can tailor it to whether or not you're good at balancing and you have a lot of the average strength you need. Maybe you lack the flexibility or the opposite. Then you have the press pro, like the keep pushing program, which leads then from being able to do a handstand and having a reasonable amount of control and understanding of the alignment and how it works upside down, to being able to move your legs, do the tuck handstand, do the straddle handstand, do the various entries, which are kind of the jump entries.
Yeah.
And if you think about this, how that relates to press, you've learned to jump in a straddle into a handstand. You can hold the straddle handstand, you can hold a tuck handstand, you can jump into a tuck handstand, and so on. And you can control your legs up there. That means that you're likely to some degree able, after learning that, you're to some degree able to start learning a negative press, for example, because you can hold a straddle, you can enter into a jump, through a jump, which then is a press with a jumping component and speed attached to it. So that means, okay, then you're likely able to have a low level of pressing strength, which then leads you into the press program. Press program, as we just said, separated into two parts, which mean that like you don't need a lot of low pressing to be able to work on the one arm, but unless you have a decent degree of high pressing strength, so that at least you're close to holding a pike handstand and so on, it's good to have these things before you continue into Push Harder, which then works on the straddle one arm handstand, which is kind of the basic foundation level for advanced hand balancing practice.
It's kind of Push Harder is the equivalent of Push for one arm practice.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
From zero to hero. Other question we have: which is the best stretch for the hip flexors, the long lunge or the couch stretch? It's a false dichotomy, because there is no best stretch for your hip flexors. There is only the one that targets your own individual restrictions. What you will find, particularly in this one, is if your rectus femoris is tight, so one of the quadriceps, that will limit hip extension, and the couch stretch is best to target that. And then if your rectus femoris isn't the restriction, then the long lunge is good. But generally, I'd actually advise a combination of working both of them at the same time. Would be quite common in a lot of the programs I'd write. We'd be doing something with the knee flexed, and then something with the leg straight and the hip in full extension, or as close to full extension as you can get. So yeah, it's once again, it is like, it's also one of those things, like it's depending on the limit, you might feel the stretch work somewhere else, but then you'll clear up one of the limitations and then everything else opens up in hip extension. So it's one of these things, very variable person to person, more so than other kind of positions. Like a forward fold is quite straightforward for most people. There's not that many specific limitations that are outside the norm, whereas hip flexors, we have I have to remember my anatomy now, about 10 different muscles involved in hip flexion. If one of them is restricting it, I would feel like all of them are restricting it. So there's a lot to play with, but the goal would be to do both.
So one more question that I had here is how do you deal with rotation in a handstand? It's a very common question. It's not something that you meet on the kind of beginner to intermediate level of handstands a lot, because you will be largely dealing with a two-dimensional plane of backwards and forwards. backwards then being like falling towards, or forwards being falling towards the finger side of your hand, meaning overbalance, and underbalance then being meaning falling towards the heel side of your palm and back to your feet. Rotation kind of comes into play when you are starting to learn the lateral dimension of handstands, which then is something that kind of is more on the push harder side of how we've structured it. But it's like rotation is it's an interesting concept because it's very counterintuitive in terms of what is happening, and it's also one that leads into this classic misunderstanding of the midsection side of things. So rotation happens, like let's say you did now take a one arm handstand, or even just the kind of side shifting towards a one arm handstand. So what will happen for most beginners is that as they start to shift, when they're like, let's say they're in a straddle handstand and their feet is perfectly on one line in space, handstand looks reasonably good, shoulders are stacked and so on, and then they start leaning over to the side. And even if they do this with very proper setup where they're able to kind of get their hips into kind of a diagonal alignment, as we talk about in push harder, where you really want to get kind of this, where you will bring the leading leg, meaning that if you go on the left arm, you will kind of be starting to bring the left leg down a little bit towards the floor, not into a deep flag, but you're setting up a diagonal there. So what happens to most people is that as you do this, first of all, this perfect line between your feet in space that you have on two arms in your straddle might not transfer so well as you start this movement, because like you're moving into new territory, you don't know what you're doing. The likelihood of these two legs of yours staying exactly on the same plane is unlikely, so that you might be starting some sort of rotation from your hip there. But the interesting thing is that it's very hard to fix it from the hip, because what starts happening when you do this, regardless if the twist starts happening from your hip or if it happens from your shoulder, you'll need to fix it from the shoulder. You'll need to basically, as your center of mass starts moving outside of your base of support, or this rotation starts happening, you need to be re-establishing your shoulder underneath that, then putting the leg back in place. And the most common thing actually that happens is that like you lean over and like the movement starts, it moves correctly at first, but like there's loads more weight that comes on that arm, then you're not used to being in this area, and that destabilizes your shoulder. And you won't even see it, but that little destabilization leads to the shoulder moving slightly, which then like that manifests further up in the chain, and that exacerbates as then the legs start to kind of rotate out of shape. And you'll usually see it by the top leg kind of opening in the hip flexor and flying over backwards.
Yeah, I find that's a lot of what you're looking at as well, is when you shift the weight over, people have a tendency to not push directly into the ground, but they actually start pushing up and back. So they're kind of, maybe it's the increased weight starts recruiting some of the muscles involved in flexion of the shoulder. Mm. So then it goes from like, it's 5 millimeters of a difference.
Yeah, it's very small.
Like, but then the shoulder goes from the stacked position and slightly more open. And then it's just, it sets up that chain. It's like the shoulder's more open. There's no one point of contact with the ground, basically. And then the back, if you look at the back, you'll see it begins to arch, going in a kind of diagonal from shoulder to opposite hip. And then it's gone. It's just lost.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, that like this rotation, like I usually say that like it sounds a bit confusing, but like rotation relates to the one arm handstand as arching relates to the two arm handstand. So the arching then being a result of a suboptimal shoulder position where the shoulder sinks a bit more than it needs to, and that causes the arch. That is kind of the same that happens, just when you add this third dimension in space, you, especially in a straddled position, there is very little likelihood that both legs will fall backwards into an arch at the same tempo. What will happen is that the top leg will kind of take over that beginning momentum and then spiral out of control. So main thing you need to know for countering and dealing with this is just like, one part is just getting good. You just need to practice a lot, getting strong in the area, getting the understanding and awareness and so on. But be very aware that like if you don't have, like, and this comes back to the previous question, if you don't have a press, if you have very little control in underbalance and very little control of a solid straddle handstand, like when you start leaning over, like your legs will start spinning and you will have very little understanding of the control. While when you're really good at this, when you have a one arm handstand and you're really stable in this, you can do all kinds of twisted position because you just place the leg there, but the shoulder won't collapse as a result of it, and you can just hold.
Shoulder placement first, everything else second, including alignment. Indeed. So, moving on to our last question. Is it our last question? I'll have to check with our producer. Last one. Cool. Who has a better chance of surviving on a deserted island? Or desert island? Deserted desert island. Mikael or Emmet?
Emmet, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to claim that one.
Yeah, probably. I'll just like fucking...
You'll just play Kaizo and then forget to gather food.
Yeah, I would probably survive for a while and then I'd get wrecked. I think we both would get wrecked though, but...
I don't think we're like, look at our skill sets. We're not very practical people.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you do? You're going to stare at the floor all day.
Yeah. I am a handstand.
And I bend people.
How the hell can I be good at surviving?
Yeah, it's not a known discipline for survivors yet. Maybe if there was locals on the island and natives, we could entertain them enough to win some food. Possibly they wouldn't eat us because you look like a skull and...
Yeah, there was not that much bones on me, so, or like meat on me, so they could eat my traps though. It's probably very nutritious.
Might be a bit gristly and just a bit too lean.
Yeah.
No leg meat. Yeah.
I guess that wraps up our Q&A session for this time.
Yeah.
As we said, throw a brick through our window with a note attached to it with your questions, or alternatively do it on social media. Probably slightly easier and cheaper for our sake, and maybe also for you in case we catch you.
Yeah, it's going to cost you. So don't remember, or don't remember, or check us out at Handstand Factory on Instagram, Mikael Balancing, or Emmet Lewis. If you're interested in our programs, you're interested in learning anything, check out handstandfactory.com. Other than that, see you next week.
Yeah, thanks.